And one of the things that I like to do as an astrologer is, be a hermetic astrologer. And that is take what I am observing and actually learn from it. So I make a prediction, and if I get it wrong, I go back and I look at that and I analyze how I got it wrong and how the chart was actually showing me the correct answer. What did I miss? Now, before you click off my channel because you're like, Monica, I hate you. You were wrong in your predictions and you suck. I'm never listening to you again. Hear me out. Astrologers use different methods to analyze the situations at hand, and experience is a really big factor in that. I'll be the first to tell you that I am a baby astrologer, and this was my first ever presidential election prediction since I started studying astrology hardcore back in 2019. Now, I used a number of methods to analyze the charts. I used Horary astrology, transits, progressions, solar returns, and annual perfections. And when I rewatched my videos, I noticed several things that I got wrong and several things that I was on the right track with. All of the methods worked, but I made one fatal flaw that influenced all my other delineations, and that was reading the Horary chart wrong, which I read first. Now, this was not the fault of the Horary. In retrospect, looking at it after the election, it clearly showed the outcome of the election. And I can see what I missed in the chart, and what was so kindly pointed out to me in the comment section below the video by several commenters. Thank you so much for that. And because I believed I read the Horary chart right, that judgment skewed my analysis of the other charts. So I wanted to briefly share with you what planetary configurations I believed showed Trump's victory and where I saw those in the original analysis, and also where I saw Harris's loss in the original analysis. And then I want to go over the Horary chart again and point out what I missed so we can all learn from this experience. As I said in my previous video, so these are really great learning opportunities. I'm not claiming to be a master of astrology ever. I think I'll be a student forever, which I think is, something that we have to accept the fact that, astrology is expanding forever. And it's like a fractal. Okay, I could get into this all day, but it just goes on and on forever. There's so many layers and levels and things, different ways to turn the jewel, as my teacher says, and look at it from a different perspective. And so we have to remember that we are students here, and that we need to, have a sense of humility. And, the chart will show us what's going on, but we as the reader can make, we can make mistakes. We can see it wrong, and it's okay. It's okay to be wrong. So I just want to put that out there with all transparency, that I am doing these charts and looking at these charts, not to show like how great I am or whatever, but to learn from astrology and to learn how these things are showing up, because I find it super fascinating, right? So first, I believe the winning transit for Trump can be seen best with the transits of the day to his natal chart and in his solar return for 2024. So let's take a look at those charts. So the first chart we're going to look at here is Donald Trump's natal chart. So the ascendant's at 29 degrees Leo, conjunct Mars at 26 Leo. He's got his sun in Gemini, conjunct the North Node and Uranus. And then those are all in a nice trine to Jupiter in Libra. And then we also have the moon in Sagittarius at 21 degrees Sagittarius. So this is Trump's natal chart. Now let's take a look at his natal chart with the election day chart. All right, so on the screen here, you can see that Trump's chart is in the middle, and we have the transits of election day, November 5th, 2024, on the outside. Now, I think that the winning transit for Trump was this Jupiter in conjunction with his Gemini Sun, North Node, and Uranus, all in Jupiter, and that was activating this natal trine to his natal Jupiter. And in the previous election that he did win in 2016, this was also being activated as well. Something else that's interesting to note that was pointed out to me is that earlier in the day, the moon made a conjunction to Venus here, and Venus was conjunct his natal moon. So that also is a testimony for blessings and good fortune coming to him. And obviously he did have a good fortuitous day. So in terms of the way the transits were interacting with his natal chart, I think that those were the winning transits for him. Now, if we take a look at his solar return for 2024, you can see that we also have Jupiter applying to meet up with all of those planets in Gemini. We've got his natal sun, which returns to the same position every year on his solar return. And flanking his sun during this solar return was Venus and Mercury, all in Gemini. The symbolism here is we've got Jupiter blessing the sun that year, which shows an expansion in leadership and promotion for him that year. We do have Saturn up here conjunct the MC in the solar return, which could represent taking on a greater amount of responsibility, as well as, reaping the rewards for a lot of hard work. Saturn is the ruler of agriculture and therefore represents, putting in a lot of work and then reaping the harvest later, so it takes time. Everything with Saturn takes time. And so this could represent that this particular, time in his life, he worked really, really hard for something, for his career and everything. And now he is reaping the rewards of that, harvesting his good work kind of a thing. The Neptune in this particular configuration to the MC and Saturn does give me pause that there is some sort of illusion or something that we can't quite see clearly when it comes to the career and the leadership role. And I'm not sure exactly what that means yet. But that is something that I'm going to be watching as events unfold. It does make me wonder whether or not there will be some sort of event that happens before Inauguration Day, because Neptune does have the ability to sort of sweep things away from people, and it's kind of a drain in the chart. So it could represent sort of, that he gets this greater responsibility, he has this victory, but then something happens and it gets swept away. I'm not sure what that means. It could also mean that this particular victory, on another, like, let's spin it in a positive way. Let's turn the jewel and, what would it mean in a positive way, right? This could mean that this particular, promotion that he's put in a lot of hard work for and now he's reaping the rewards of feels rather euphoric and otherworldly and has some sort of great divine meaning to him and to others. Anyway, let's look at his natal chart with the solar return on the outside. Okay, so here you can see we've got his natal chart on the inside, the solar return on the outside. Again, we have this beautiful Jupiter, benefic Jupiter, that is going to be conjoining that and activating that natal trine to Jupiter. I mean, that is really the winning aspect here for me. Now, in my analysis, I said that Saturn could possibly be prohibiting that because Saturn is squaring the lights in his solar return chart. I do still see that there could be something that has to do with the law or all of the legal things that he's dealing with that is creating a lot of pressure. Clearly, this didn't prohibit him becoming the president, but it doesn't mean that it won't cause him trouble this year. So there's that. Now, quickly, I just want to go back to his solar return. Here we are. Now, something that I found was really interesting, and I just want to note it here, is that we have the ascendant at 14 degrees Cancer, which is conjoined to the fixed star Sirius, the dog star. Now, this was pointed out to me by a lovely commenter on my Horary video. Thank you so much. I don't currently use fixed stars in my practice, but I am studying them and trying to understand them and see how they work. And I think that this one is really, really interesting. And I wanted to read to you what Bernadette Brady says in Brady's book of Fixed Stars about the fixed star Sirius. I'm just going to read to you, let's see, in her section on Sirius, she has a paragraph that's titled Earlier Opinions. And this is where she tells you about earlier astrologers and what they thought of these fixed stars. So it says, Ptolemy states that Sirius is like Jupiter with a touch of Mars. Robeson mentions fame and honor, as well as faithfulness and guardians. Eberton agrees with Robeson and adds that a person influenced by Sirius is in danger of pushing things forward too fast. Riger agrees with Eberton and adds that such a person loves power. I think that this is really apt for the former president Donald Trump, and it really helps, color his character here. And it also shows fame and honor. So I think that his ascendant and his solar return being conjunct this fixed star Sirius shows that this year there could be fame and honor. It's also in a trine to the Saturn, which is conjunct the midheaven. So that could be another testimony of this year having fame and honor attached to it. And so I thought this was really interesting that in his solar return, and I didn't know this when I was doing the first analysis because I was not looking at fixed stars, but I thought it was really interesting that in his solar return, this star was conjoined his ascendant. And also in the Horary chart, the planet that represented Trump was conjoined this fixed star, and it means fame and honor. So let's just keep that in mind when we get to going over the Horary chart again, and I'll try to remember to mention it again as well. But I think that that's really interesting, and I just love the fixed stars, and I just love the added nuance that they add to the charts. They're really fascinating. Okay. So before we go on to the Horary chart, the next thing I want to talk about is Harris's charts and the losing transit that I believe was activated that resulted in a loss for Harris, according to the various methods. I believe the losing transit for Harris can best be seen in the daily transits to her natal chart, her solar return, and her perfection year ruler. So let's take a look at those. Okay, so here we are with Kamala Harris's natal chart. She's got her ascendant here at 24 degrees Gemini conjunct the North Node. Her moon is at 27 Aries and her sun is at 27 Libra. She also has Saturn at the midheaven, 28 Aquarius. Her midheaven is actually 2 degrees Pisces and in a nice trine with Mercury, which happens to be her chart ruler. I think that that is an added testimony to what I talked about. In the analysis of her chart, I talked about this trine that shows up in her chart between her ascendant, the sun, and Saturn. And since Saturn is in an out of sign conjunction with the midheaven, I think that that strengthens that placement. And then her chart ruler, Mercury, is also in a trine to her midheaven, which shows that she could be in a place of leadership in her life. So I just wanted to add that on there. Okay, so now this trine that I just talked about is what I was talking about being activated in her natal chart that I thought would show a win. And it was activated. But let's talk about what was going on the day of the election. And then we'll look at her solar return and her perfection ruler. Okay, so on the day of the election, let me go to that by wheel. All right, so in this screen, you can see we have Kamala Harris's chart on the middle, in the middle wheel. And then on the outside, we have the transits for November 5th, 2024, which was election day. Now, I thought that it was very positive that we had Jupiter conjunct her ascendant and North Node. I also thought that it was very positive that Venus was making a nice trine to her moon as well as a sextile to her sun. I still do think that those were very positive transits. One thing that I thought was interesting is that all of the polls projected that she would be in the lead, and there were several astrologers that predicted a win for her as well. And we do have the sun conjoined her natal Neptune. And I think that that is really interesting since Neptune represents deception, lies, obfuscation, and fog, and things not being able to be seen clearly. So the sun represents like the ambitions in a person's life and their plot line. And so I think it's interesting that so many people didn't see her path forward clearly. I mean, even Alan Lichtman with his 13 keys got this prediction wrong. Okay, so there were several people who made predictions and forecasts who did not see this one clearly, myself included. And I think that that's really interesting with the sun conjoining her Neptune, which can often show where we don't see things clearly, right? Okay. So it's almost like we were destined to not see this one clearly. Okay. Now, we also have Uranus in a conjunction with her Jupiter, which could throw things off. And then also, Saturn in the 10th house and Neptune in the 10th house. Again, Neptune showing what we don't see clearly. So we don't see her career advancement clearly. And then Saturn in the 10th house, one of the things that I said in the analysis video was that Saturn in her solar return, when I put the two charts together, shows up in her 10th house. And I was saying, well, that could be, reaping the rewards of a lot of hard work, just like I saw it in Trump's chart, how it could be, putting in a lot of work and a lot of hard work and then reaping your harvest, right? So Saturn can mean reaping the harvest, or it can also mean, taking on a lot more responsibility. But Saturn also means a restructuring, and it can also mean a death or a letting go, or, being exhausted with something, or, saying goodbye to something. So I think that that's really interesting because all of those interpretations are accurate. They're just different parts of the jewel, as we say. We turn the jewel. So there's positive delineations of a transit, and there's also negative delineations of a transit. So I looked more at the positive ones, and the reason why I did that when I was doing the original analysis is because I really felt very strongly that I had read the Horary chart correctly, and that it was showing more responsibility would be on Harris's plate. Now that we know the election results and we know she's not going to be the president, then, or at least that's where we're standing right now, right? Then we can see that this, in retrospect, we can see that this transiting Saturn in her 10th house is showing an ending of her career. Now, additionally, we can just stay on this chart, and I want to talk about her perfection year ruler. So she is in a first house perfection year, which is ruled, her first house here is Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. So we look at Mercury to see what is going on with Mercury for that year, and that'll give us a lot of clues for this person, what is going to be happening for them in that year. Well, Mercury on election day had entered Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the detriment of Mercury, and so that does not look good. So that was another indication that I looked at that gave me pause as to whether or not I thought she would actually win. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at her solar return and then the two charts, her solar return and her natal chart together. Because I love looking at solar returns, and they're one of my favorite ways of making predictions for people. Okay, so here we have the solar return for Kamala Harris. Her birthday is October 20th, 2024. And the biggest thing in her solar return that I thought could possibly block a win, well, there's a couple of things, but the biggest thing here is that we have Saturn in square with the moon. That's not looking good. And those are also both in sesquiquadrate to the sun. As I said in the analysis, that's called a Thor's hammer. She has a second one here with the sun and Pluto, and both of those are pointing towards the moon. So those are two Thor's hammers. Those mean setback and delays. Those do not mean easy things happening at all. That means that somebody is trying to push through something and make something happen. And I said in the video, could she do it? I didn't know. I wasn't sure. That was giving me a lot of pause in terms of the validity of the horary. Now, I do think that also, the sun square Pluto is a really hard transit. It's a crisis moment. It's a life or death situation. It's, something that feels really, really heavy. And, so that's not a fun transit to have in your solar return. And then also this square with this moon squaring Saturn, that means hitting a red light. So even though the moon is applying to Jupiter, which I thought was really good, especially since Jupiter is in her first house of her natal chart, you can see here in the solar return, this square to Saturn means red lights. And additionally, you can see here in the solar return, let me change colors here, that we have the ascendant of the solar return is in Sagittarius and the descendant is in Gemini. This means that the angles are flipped. So let's go ahead and look at both her natal chart and the solar return together, so this next part that I tell you makes sense. Okay, so here we have Kamala Harris's natal chart on the inside, and on the outside we have the solar return for her on October 20th, 2024. Now, her ascendant is in Gemini here, and you can see that we have Jupiter here, and that is a really beautiful blessing, and it's activating her natal trine. That's one of the reasons why I thought that she would win. But we do have the ascendant of the solar return over in the 7th house. So this is, the angles of her natal chart are being flipped in the solar return, which represents an opposition and could represent that, what she's being known for, the ascendant, which represents her selfhood and her personality and her behavior and how she puts herself out there in a personal way, is going through a setting or a sunset moment. because the seventh house is where everything passes, everything rises in at the ascendant over here on this side of the chart, culminates at the top of the chart. That's like high noon, and then sets over here at the descendant. That's like the sunset area. So you can see that her ascendant, which represents her in the solar return, is setting. Now, this is something that I did not take into account in terms of, representing a loss for her. I just took that into account in terms of it's an opposition, the angles are flipped, and so that this year could be very challenging and could be a very dynamic year, and it still could be, right? But it is interesting to note now that we know the election results and that her particular, her status as the vice president will now be going through like a sunset phase. Okay, so I think that that's really interesting. And then again, we have Saturn at the top of the chart in the 10th house. It's transiting her 10th house. And in the solar return, it's conjoining that IC, which I said could be a death in the family because the IC represents the family in the 4th house of home and family. But this also could be representing, this could be confirming, instead of showing that she's reaping the rewards and going to be harvesting, something beautiful from all her hard work and everything and gaining lots more responsibility. Saturn going to the IC, when we flip the charts here and put them together, could be showing an ending, because the IC is an ending and beginning. It's sort of like the midnight point to the day. It's where, the day, the night ends at midnight. 11:59 p.m. is the very end of the night. And then 12 o'clock a.m. is the very beginning of the dawn. And even though we don't see the dawn, we don't see the light, rising over the horizon until we get to, the eastern horizon, until we get to the sunrise point, the light is still increasing by the fact that the sun is getting closer. We're turning, as the earth, we're turning closer towards the sun, and the sun is rising, gaining light until it finally comes up over the horizon, but it's rising back up in its, journey. So there is something to that. So this could be an ending to her career. And obviously we are seeing that, what she's being known for is going to be going through a sunset phase, and there's going to be an ending of her, place of leadership here as the vice president. And I do just want to point out also with this placement, let me put another circle here just before I really close it out here. If something were to happen to Biden, if this represented that there was going to be an ending or a death or something that then would give her greater responsibility, if something were to happen to Biden before Inauguration Day, before she passes the torch to Donald Trump, then she would be sworn in as the president, right? And so I think that that's really interesting to note, especially since Biden's health is in a precarious position, and looking at his charts and everything. And I did cast a Horary chart as to whether or not Biden would resign or have a health issue before his term was up. I'm not sure if I'm going to put that out. I'm not sure if I'm brave enough to put that out with all of the criticism and whatnot, but I did cast one, and I am going to, keep an eye on that and see what happens. And, if something happens and that Horary chart delineation proves to be correct or whatnot, then maybe I'll share it with you guys in retrospect, in hindsight, so we can learn from that after the fact. But, I'm not the only person who is, wondering about Biden's health, right? So if something were to happen to Biden and then Harris would take over the presidency, then all of the astrologers and everything that predicted that she would become president this year would then end up being correct. And both things would be true. Donald Trump would be inaugurated in January, and Harris would take over the presidency before then. And then all the astrologers, in effect, would be true with all of their delineations and predictions, right? So this whole experience has been pretty interesting, in that regard. Anyway, so just had to put that out there just in case, something were to happen with that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and move on to the Horary chart. Here's the Horary chart that I cast. Okay, So I cast this chart on September 29th, 2024. Now, in the Horary chart analysis video, I said that the ascendant represented Trump. The ascendant is at 3 degrees Aries, 38 minutes, meaning that Trump's planet was Mars at 14 degrees Cancer, 17 minutes. There's the dog star, the Sirius dog star again. Okay, so Trump's planet is conjunct Sirius. So that is interesting, which means fame and honor. Kamala Harris's planet would be represented by the descendant, which is 3 degrees Libra, which gives her Venus at 8 degrees Scorpio. So now, what I said at this point in my delineation was that both of these planets, Mars and Venus, they're both accidentally fortified by being in angular houses. Mars is here in the 4th house, which gives him lots of power to act, and Venus is here in the 7th house, which also gives her power to act. They're both essentially debilitated. Mars is in Cancer, which is his fall, and Venus is in detriment in Scorpio. So both of them are debilitated. Now, I said at this point in the video that I thought that meant that their, race to the, I thought that meant that their race would be neck and neck. Now, there was definitely times during the tallying up of the votes where it seemed like they were neck and neck, but there was also times when Trump was way ahead. So I think I had that, relatively, okay in my delineation. I mean, I think Trump was at 51% and Harris was at 47% or something like that when all was said and done. That's pretty close, but I wouldn't really call that exactly neck and neck. So I think I was a little bit off that. But I think that in terms of looking at the astrology chart, it's pretty dang close to, how close the race was in that way. Now, I said in the Horary that the next aspect that the moon made, because the moon represented the people, the popular vote, and in my research also the electoral college, although I have found out that some people are giving the dispositor of the moon, that planet, as the electoral college. So I'm going to continue to research that and figure out what, to find out which one represents the electoral college. Is it the moon or is it the dispositor of the moon? Okay. Anyway, I said that the next transit that the moon makes, and I'll go ahead and erase these circles here, would show where the vote went. And the next transit is a sextile to Venus from the moon. And that is why I said that I thought that the vote would go, that the winning person would be Venus, which would be Kamala Harris. But what I failed to take into account were a couple of testimonies. So let me show you what those are. Okay, the biggest, most obvious ones. First, we have all of these planets here in the 7th house. These are going to add testimony to what the 7th house represents. So in this instance, the 7th house represents Kamala Harris, right? Now, Mercury is in a partile, almost exact conjunction with the South Node, and is also combust by being so close to the sun. So the South Node means loss, and being combust with the sun is a really bad place. A commenter told me that because Mercury was right here on the descendant, that would mean that Mercury was a co-significator of the 7th house person. So that would be that Mercury was a co-significator for Kamala Harris. And this would show a loss because we've got the South Node in combustion, and that's really, really bad. Additionally, the moon is in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. So if Mercury is the dispositor of the moon, kind of showing what is going to be happening, that would show that there would be a loss. On top of that, the moon is in Virgo, which is in the fall of Venus. So the moon does not like Venus. Now, I did see all of these things. I did think about them. I thought, okay, the moon is in the fall of Venus. That means the people don't like the moon. The people don't like Venus. And I thought that was really, really strange, considering that the moon's next aspect was to Venus. Now, the other aspects that were happening like at the exact same time, and so it was very, very close, was Mercury is conjoining the South Node. That's happening almost exactly the same time as the moon is making that sextile to Venus. And also Mars was making a trine, and you can see this here. Mars was in a partile trine to Saturn. Now, I also, I was trying to really read this chart with as much objectivity as possible. So, the ascendant was representing Donald Trump, and I chose the ascendant to represent Donald Trump because my candidate, which was RFK Jr., endorsed him. So I felt like that represented my horse in the race as much as possible, right? And I also feel like it was confirmed with the fact that we have the North Node here in Aries, and Trump struggles with rosacea and redness on his face, right? And the North Node in the first house was another thing that I did not take into account in my final judgment, because I was worried that I was, kind of trying to make the chart work out in my favor. And this transit, this aspect from the moon to Venus was so strong and not prohibited by Mercury conjoining the south node first, or Mars making that trine with Saturn first, that I felt very confident in my judgment of the chart that this particular, these testimonies, Mercury in the south node in the sun and the north node in the first house, could be ignored, okay, if that makes sense. So, as well as the moon, being in the fall of Venus. I thought that the aspect to Venus really just was stronger than those other testimonies. I was wrong. Obviously, the co-significator of the seventh house, Mercury being the dispositor of the moon and conjoining the south node, it meant a loss. And so Kamala Harris lost the election, and Trump won. I didn't think that this would be strong enough testimony to prohibit the aspect, but it in fact was. And if I take you through the exact transits, we will see that Mercury actually conjoins that south node and perfects that before the moon makes the sextile to Venus, and that is the prohibition. So let me go ahead and walk you through the animated chart here. So I'm going to switch my screen. Okay, here you can see I've got an animated chart of September 29th, 2024. 6:53 p.m. is when I cast the Horary for, and so for the all intents and purposes, this is good to show you guys what I want to show you that I missed. It doesn't matter that the chart switched to whole sign, because all we're looking for is when does the sextile from the moon to Venus perfect, and when does anything else happen before then. So we're starting out here. We've got the south node at 6 degrees Libra, 38 minutes. Mercury at 6 degrees Libra, 32 minutes. The moon is at 6 degrees Virgo, 34 minutes, and Venus is at 8 degrees Scorpio, 20 minutes. The other 2 points that we're looking at is Saturn at 14 Pisces, 25 minutes retrograde, and Mars at 14 Cancer, 17 minutes. Okay, now we've got, Mars was representing Donald Trump, Venus was representing Kamala Harris, the moon was representing the vote, and this Mercury south node combust the sun situation is the co-significator for the seventh house, because these are in the seventh house. Okay, what we want to see is which aspect perfects first, and did anything happen to prohibit this sextile between the moon and Venus. So I'm going to go ahead and advance the chart by the hour. Going to 7:53, the moon's at 7 degrees. Mercury and the south node are only 2 minutes of arc away, so they are very, very close. And the Mars has still not perfected the trine to Saturn. The moon obviously has not perfected the sextile to Venus. So if we just walk this ahead by the minute here, and I'm just watching Mercury and the south node here on the screen, and we will see that Mercury, there we go, Mercury has conjoined the south node, and this happened before the sextile from the moon to Venus, and this is what I missed. This represented a loss for the seventh house ruler, because it was in the seventh house. Obviously things have switched and adjusted here because I advanced the chart, but this means that that person would receive a loss and they would not win. Now, that was something that I missed because I did not take that into account, and I didn't think that Mercury mattered. And that's why I ignored Mercury and the South Node and the Sun. Now, looking back in retrospect, I understand what my commenters were trying to show me in the chart, that Mercury was the co-significator because it was located in the seventh house. It was also, as I discussed, it's the ruler of the moon. It's the dispositor of the moon in Virgo. And so it's representing, what has power over the moon. So what has power over the vote, what has power over, the flow of events. And that happens to be Mercury. Mercury conjoined the South Node, representing a loss. So those were the things that I missed in the Horary. So now that we've gone over the details of all these things, I want to thank you so much for watching my analysis video and for having compassion for me as a baby astrologer. We all make mistakes sometimes, and it's important to pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off and keep going, right? I may be writing some daily horoscopes or some daily reflections or whatnot over on my Substack. I will leave a link in the description below for you to come over there and hang out with me there. You can subscribe or whatnot as a free or paid subscriber. If you want to hang out with me this next week while I kind of take a breather from doing videos and figure out exactly where I want to go from here. I don't expect myself to do much more political astrology. I've got a lot of reflections that I'm working with, a lot of things I'm going over in my head. This was a risk that I took, and I had an epic fail. So that's hard. That's really, really hard. Anyway, all right. I wish you all a blessed week, and thank you so much for hanging out with me, and thank you for going over these charts with me. And I really appreciate everybody who commented and had such kind things to say, and took the time to analyze the charts and give me their constructive feedback in really kind, compassionate ways. I really appreciate that, and I learned a lot from what you guys said. So thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.